Okay, and I believe that we are live now. So thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event hosted by the Lay Muslim Network. Obviously, the topic for discussions tonight it will be Islamophobia, the Labour Party, and what's next. My name is Ibrahim Ali. I'll be your host for this evening, and it's really great you can all attend and make it and contribute towards working together to tackle Islamophobia within the Labour Party, but of course in broader society. So for a bit of context or the backdrop to this event, you may remember in November of last year, the Labour Muslim Network published a great groundbreaking report into Islamophobia within the Labour Party. And this piece of research saw the largest consultation of Muslim Labour Party members and supporters in the history of our party and our movement. And the findings obviously were very deeply concerning and stark. And obviously the report itself highlights consistent experiences amongst Muslim members and supporters pertaining to Islamophobia. And that report is obviously still available. It was widely reported at the time, but if you'd like to read a copy or download a copy, if you can go on to labourmuslims.org/research. That's labourmuslims.org/research. Now, tonight's session will obviously be highlighting personal experiences of Islamophobia in the Labour Party and what practical steps which should be taken, but also are being taken to tackle the issue within the Labour Party. And tonight we'll have a great lineup of speakers from across our movement, and hopefully our sort of speakers will stick to 5 minutes, speak about their experiences, but also their perspectives on tackling Islamophobia in the Labour Party. And hopefully we'll then take questions at the end from members, and that's a great opportunity to really hear from our members and supporters in terms of how we can really move this forward. Now, for those of you who are joining us, we're using a platform called StreamYard. Obviously, other platforms are available, and unfortunately, StreamYard itself does not work on Safari, so you will need to use the Google Chrome browser. If not, well, you can also log on to our Facebook page, Labour Muslim Network, and we also stream live on Facebook, I believe on YouTube. So, without further ado, we'll start with our first speaker, and I will move that along. So, actually, before we go to the first speaker, just to say a bit about Labour Muslim Network for those of you who are joining us for the first time. So, the Labour Muslim Network is an inclusive organisation which has been elevating and representing the voices of Muslim members from across our movement for the past 4 years, and we've done so much from campaigning in local elections, general elections, to hosting a wide variety of events and member-focused activities and engagement and dialogue sessions. And the Labour Muslim Network has been really all about bridging the gap between the Labour Party and Muslim communities across our country. And obviously, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you'd really like to find out more about how a Labour Muslim Network runs, its team, and all the programs and events, please do log on to labourmuslims.org and also join today. We really should have as many people joining as possible to support the work that we're doing within our movement, really. So, again, if you have any questions or you'd like to be more involved, please sign up online or do drop us an email. You can email us at info@labourmuslims.org. That's info@labourmuslims.org. That's all one word. And a member of the team will be in touch as soon as possible. Now, as I said earlier, for those of you who were here, tonight's event is a great opportunity again for us to come together as a network and as a movement to hear the experiences and perspectives of some of our outstanding speakers. And we look forward to the next stages of our journey in rooting out Islamophobia across the Labour Party, but also in wider society. And to do that, we have a wide array of speakers from different perspectives of our movement, and I'm really excited and glad that they can join us today. And I do feel it's a really great gathering of minds, really, in terms of how we can actually tackle the issue really well. So going forward, I would like to actually call our first speaker, if that's okay. So our first speaker is Afsana Begum, who is the Member of Parliament for Popular Limehouse, and she will, I believe, be speaking for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim, and good evening and assalamu alaikum to everybody that's joined us for this event. I want to begin by talking a little bit about my experiences of being a politician, as being a parliamentarian. I am somebody who has first-hand experience of the rise of Islamophobia of the past decades. And I know every single day people of Muslim backgrounds like myself who face discrimination and prejudice. And it's crystal clear to me that my presence in Parliament, even as the first MP to observe the hijab in the form of the headscarf, makes so many people and so many MPs uncomfortable. And it was only in January 2018 when a multi-faith prayer room was opened in Parliament, and it was only not until March last year, thanks to MPs like Zara Sultana, when a trial of halal and kosher meals were served in the House of Commons cafeteria. And that was announced, and it was then put on hold due to the COVID-19 crisis. Despite being a newer, relatively younger MP, I'm regularly heckled and aggressively interrupted in the chamber in what appears to me and many others to be quite targeted. And in fact, the level of trolling, intimidation, and victimization and smear campaigns have been, really relentless. It's been actually quite off the scale. And it seems that for so many in the media and elsewhere, I'm fair game. I'm constantly having to cope with racist and misogynistic attacks, including ongoing risks to my safety. I mean, that's just Parliament alone. But I think it's really important to, for this in this event, to really look at what's happening also within the Labour Party and the Labour Party's response to the rise of Islamophobia. We have a duty in the party, I think, a responsibility to turn the tide against Islamophobia and to really go to its roots and really wipe it out. Now, there's a number of ways that I think that can happen. And the first one I'd like to touch upon is our responses to the government's activities and behaviours and actions. Last year, there was a counterterrorism and security bill, which was passed, which we sadly abstained on. Now, so many of us for a really long time have raised concerns that our approach to counterterrorism and the government's approach to counterterrorism has been modelled on Islamophobia itself. And the bill that passed in June last year removed the existing statutory deadline for the completion of the independent review of the Prevent programme, which we know is widely criticised for fostering discrimination against Muslims. It was developed itself without a firm evidence base and rooted in a really sort of expansive definition of extremism. And we know it's led to overt targeting of Muslim children in schools. And we know what it's meant for young Muslim people in particular, being viewed through the lens of security. But we abstained on that, unfortunately. We didn't put up a challenge to that bill being rushed through Parliament in June last year. And I think that's allowed, that bill passing has further entrenched discrimination against Muslims, actually. And we know now, with the appointment of William Shawcross as the independent reviewer of Prevent is a farce. And that's what bills like that have led to. So I think first it's really important that our party, our leadership, our members, and anybody in a position of influence and power within our party makes sure that bills and pieces of legislation that are being passed through Parliament are opposed where they are fostering discrimination against Muslims, and that there is a significant amount of pressure applied as well to stop these bills going through. But to also not just abstain, but to actually oppose them through votes and stand in solidarity with the Muslim community. I think when we look at the experiences of Islamophobia within our party and more widely in society, it matters just as much how we are as a party responding to individual complaints or complaints of Islamophobia within the party, as much as it is our positions on pieces of legislation in the UK and our foreign policy abroad as well, and ensuring that we don't take sort of double standards. We don't have double standards on foreign policy issues. We should speak out about the global nature of Islamophobia, where it presents itself, whether that is against the Uyghur communities in China, as much as the Muslim community in France, for example. And there should be no hierarchy in the way in which we speak out about Islamophobia in our party and on national and international issues. And I think that's really key in terms of building confidence in the party among Muslim members to feel that our views are represented by our party at all levels. I want to quickly touch upon a few other areas which I really think given my experiences and the experiences of many members who have joined this meeting today, is also really speaking and walking our values. So, we in our party are very proud of our history and track record of passing equalities legislation, and putting really at the fore our values on equality, justice, and fairness. But we've got to make sure we walk the walk. And I think a few areas in which we could really make sure we don't just see the Muslim community as a loyal vote bank, but really represent and really listen to party members from Muslim communities, is by looking at how we show allyship, how we demonstrate allyship, and our associations and connections. And that's why I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about, membership of organizations, for example, our donors to our party, for example. These are areas that we really need to look at, scrutinize, and really ask ourselves the questions about whether or not we as a party are really representing members, whether we are losing support from the Muslim community, because there are donors and there are organizations, such as the Henry Jackson Society, who often approach Labour MPs, who often send policy briefings and invite MPs, for example, and others and our party to events, to briefings, and the fact that they have a track record of fostering hatred of Muslims. And I think it's really important that we walk the walk and not just talk the talk when we think about our relationships, our financial relationships, and our memberships and associations with organizations. I think the other area that I just wanted to cover is how we deal with complaints. And as I've said before, I think it's really important not to just focus on the individual nature of a particular complaint, but also to seek to understand patterns and trends and unfortunately themes that arise from individual complaints when it comes to Islamophobia. And I think it's really important to not just look at even the last couple of years, but really go back to historical complaints. And I, as a Labour MP, have asked questions myself of the party in terms of what has happened to historical complaints of Islamophobia, really stark, really bold examples where there has been aggression, hatred spewed by party members towards other party members, officers towards members, politicians, people who are MPs, even who have gone on to do other things outside of Parliament, inside of Parliament, and how those complaints have historically not been dealt with and have seemed to have been disappeared into a vacuum. And I think it's really important to continue to apply lobby and apply pressure to really resolve some of those historical complaints. We can't move forward without dealing with our past. And I think one way of which we can do that is to really have some truths and reconcile with what has happened in our party historically when it comes to Muslim members in particular. I think, and on that note, I just wanted to sort of say, I think it's really important, cases such as the case of Saeed Siddiqui, really stark, unfortunately, really horrible examples of Islamophobia are dealt with very quickly as well. And I think that hasn't happened. And that's just one example of somebody who themselves have been targeted and seen themselves be then investigated themselves for raising a complaint of Islamophobia. And I think those are the kind of things that need to really be looked at seriously by the party, and there needs to be a strong reflection on the recommendations of the Labour Muslim Network report as to the experiences of Muslim members in light of cases like that. I'm just going to end by sort of saying I think it's really important that as a party, I think the party also one other area I think that there hasn't been enough on is really speaking out when there are examples of Islamophobia in our society, whether that is, you know, where we've seen individual MPs, for example, call out Boris Johnson on his Islamophobic comments, but calling out organisations and examples of cases where there hasn't been a really overt acknowledgement that, you know, people out there in our community feel that Islamophobia is a factor or is something that was at play. And I mean, you know, when you look at the case of Shukri Abdi, for example, I think our party could have done better in terms of really acknowledging the perspectives of the family who really felt that their case wasn't handled properly, and that Islamophobia was something that was at play in that case. And I think unless we do that, we are going to keep seeing you know, loss of confidence in our party, and experiences and feelings of representation and trust continue to break down. And I myself, as a Labour MP, as a Muslim MP, will continue to keep you know, shining the light on the experiences, the impact of Islamophobia, the structural nature of Islamophobia within our party. And I really commend the work of Labour Muslims Network to bring this report to light, to make sure that this was seen and heard by the leadership at all levels, to really bring to light and to step out of the shadows and embrace the share of responsibility that needs to be felt within the party to protect the Muslim community from Islamophobia. And I will end there and take hear from others on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Afsana, for your contribution. It's really sort of glad you could make it, and I think it's a really powerful and unique insight. What's been really sort of great to see is that Muslim women have been leading this conversation for such a long time. In fact, we've got yourself and our next speaker in the Parliamentary Labour Party is a really good sort of sign or directions to where we're heading, and that's fantastic. So thank you so much, Afsana, for your really unique insight. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our next speaker, who is Zara Sultana, who is also the new elected Labour MP for Coventry South, or newish, part of the 2019 intake along with Afsana. And Zara, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Zara Sultana, the Labour Member of Parliament for Coventry South, and I want to thank the Labour Muslim Network for inviting me to speak. It's a tough act. I've got to go after Afsana, but it's a real privilege to join you all to talk about something that is both a personal and political experience of mine. In the first few months of being an MP, I talked about how conflicting it was to be sat opposite the Prime Minister, knowing that he had compared Muslim women to letterboxes and bank robbers, and that it had led to a 375% surge in Islamophobic incidents towards Muslim women. Far from that being a hindrance or something that could cost you politically, it seems that these views were actually helpful in his rise to the premiership of the Conservative Party and then to Downing Street. A poll of Conservative members found that almost half of them believe Islam to be a threat to the British way of life. Almost 60% have a negative view or attitude towards Muslims, and 44% of those who voted for Boris Johnson believe that terrorist attacks reflect the widespread hostility of British Muslims. If this is the party of our government, and if Boris Johnson is our Prime Minister, then it is an understatement to say that we have a serious problem on our hands. But we also know that this problem is neither confined to the Conservative Party, nor is it a new thing for Muslims. The Labour Muslim Network's report on Islamophobia within the Labour Party was a sobering and a difficult read. But I wasn't taken by surprise to learn that nearly a third of Muslim members and supporters have experienced Islamophobia within the party, nor that almost half don't think that Islamophobia is taken seriously. Some within the report have said that they were called entryist. Others were asked probing questions about their beliefs in order to judge whether they are or not so-called moderate Muslims. And many have felt the pressure to not get involved with the party due to the threat of a backlash against them. Myself, my family, my friends have all experienced this in some form or another, and it is a disgraceful reality. Personally, I grew up in Birmingham during the War on Terror, and I remember distinctly the racial abuse that we would receive on the streets. Those incidents stay with you forever, but what I've grown up to realize is that the most damaging part actually is the Islamophobia beyond the slurs. That is overt, but it's the way that Muslims are described as a demographic threat. The way surveillance cameras were installed in an area near where I lived, in a Muslim majority area, under the guise of traffic control, but really they were there to spy, as well as the silencing effects of Prevent at university. The damage of Islamophobia is huge. It is reflected in economic deprivation, where the majority of Muslims live in the 10 most deprived areas of the country. It is also evident in the hate crime statistics collected by the Home Office, where over half of all religiously motivated hate crime is directed towards Muslims. And in my experience, it is also part of the hostility towards naming, recognizing, and tackling Islamophobia as a form of racism in this country. At the end of Islamophobia Awareness Month last November, I took a bit of time to reflect on how we can fight against this bigotry. But it's a fight that we can't win on our own. It isn't a fight that's going to make us popular, but it is the right thing to do. I got active in politics because I was angry at the situation my community, my working class community, found itself in. But I wanted to change things. I wanted to change the world that we find ourselves in. I wanted to fight bigotry and oppression in all of its forms for the pursuit of a better, more equal world. In politics, I find myself receiving letters wishing me a slow and painful death, or telling me to go back to my country of origin, foreigner, because I support refugees. In fact, whenever I speak up for migrants and refugees, that's when the hostility and abuse actually dials up a significant notch. But these things don't deter me, because I know that we all have so much more to do to champion equality. That is true for all marginalized groups in society. There are no competing struggles. My oppression is not worse than your oppression. And we are all motivated by the same fundamental belief, and that is the commitment to the liberation of everyone. We are not free until we are all free. And an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. So in coming together, we are made stronger. That is at the heart of being a socialist, a trade unionist, and a Muslim. In uniting our struggles, we all stand broader. And in building these links of solidarity, we are all made safer. That is how I believe we can fight Islamophobia, both within the Labour Party and in society more widely. I look forward to fighting Islamophobia and all forms of racism with everyone on this call and building those coalitions as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zara, for that really personal sort of insight. And it's really fantastic to have so many young, talented, elected members of parliament coming through and really articulating what people feel about their experience. So thank you so much. I hope you can stay for the rest of the event. Without further ado, I would like to say that we were due to hear from our chair, Afzal Khan, Labour MP for Manchester Gorton. Unfortunately, he's had a bereavement in the family. So unfortunately, we have to attend. So it would be really kind if people can make dua and pray for his family and their well-being and their loved ones. But just to say that he's been really instrumental and extremely pivotal in actually attempting to push through these conversations within the Labour Party. And he really did want to be here this evening, but unfortunately, because of that personal bereavement in the family, he could not join us. So he does send his best wishes, and he really does want to see the more events like this to occur in the future. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to our next speaker, who is Sumaya Afzal, who is a executive committee member of the Labour Muslim Network and as formerly the Muslim Council of Britain. And I think by the powers of technology, you are here, Sumaya. Thank you. Let me see if that can happen. Okay, Sumaya, if you can hear me, I'm terribly sorry, but we missed the first chunk of your contribution. So
can you hear me now?
We can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Brilliant. I'm so sorry about that. Hi, everyone. My name is Sumaya. I'm one of the directors of the Labour Muslim Network, as Ibrahim mentioned. And I'll be giving an overview of what the Labour Muslim Network has been doing on Islamophobia. This is something that has anecdotally, but also within everything that we do, has been something that members have told us about. It's something that we obviously experience ourselves and something that we've seen in wider society. So that's why in November, at the end of last year, we launched a piece of research into the prevalence of Islamophobia within the Labour Party. So how does it impact Labour members and supporters, and what are the things that we can do about it to mitigate and challenge it? It was the biggest consultation of Muslim Labour members and supporters in the party's history, and it highlighted, unfortunately, a really alarming amount of racism within our movement targeting Muslims, as well as, unfortunately, even more so, a belief by Muslim members that this issue is not being taken seriously, and them not having the confidence that this was something that could be dealt with. Just to headline some of the main things that came out of the report, you're more than welcome to go onto our website and read that if you haven't already. Over a quarter of Muslim members and supporters directly experienced Islamophobia in the Labour Party, and over a third have directly witnessed Islamophobia. And nearly half of them, half of these Muslim members and supporters believe that the Labour Party don't believe that the Labour Party takes the issue of Islamophobia seriously. That's a really significant percentage to be thinking that. And even more of them, 48% of Muslim members and supporters don't have confidence in the Labour Party complaints procedure to deal with Islamophobia effectively. And again, anecdotally, this supports a lot of the complaints that we have received from members and supporters around the complaints process. 59% of Muslim members and supporters do not feel well represented by the leadership of the Labour Party, and that's something that is incredibly important when it comes to understanding and trying to get the leadership to try and do something about it, and also the fact that there isn't that belief that the leadership of the Labour Party can tackle Islamophobia effectively is really, really important in how we then deal with the leadership and ask them to take on this really stark picture of how things are within the community, and how Muslim experiences are in the Labour Party. So following the publication of that report, it was agreed with the Labour Party that we would set up an Islamophobia task force, where we would create an action plan where we could be able to monitor the progress and the actions that have been taken by the party. It's really, really important that that we continue that conversation with our members, with our affiliates, with lots of different people. So we also, at the same time, launched a series of roundtable discussions with ordinary members, with councillors, Labour MPs, and other interested parties, because we wanted to ensure that your voices were being heard, like I said, continuously, and also were right at the heart of our work in tackling Islamophobia in the Labour movement. We would never want to go to the leadership or go, to other members within the Labour Party and not be able to say that this is something that that has come directly from members. So we wanted any action plan to something being decided at the top. This process, you know, we have tried to be as open and transparent as possible, and this is something that we've highlighted throughout. And that's why we're really happy to share with you a provisional draft action plan that we are seeing take place with the Labour Party. So the action plan, I'll go into just a brief amount of detail, includes the adoption of the APPG definition of Islamophobia, which includes all the examples of Islamophobia that have been that are associated with the APPG definition, and that will be adopted by the Labour Party itself, ratified and codified, and all Labour local authorities, councils and CLPs. We also are working on the development of comprehensive Islamophobia training to be run by the Labour Muslim Network and other relevant organisations. And we are hoping for this to be rolled out to the entire shadow cabinet, to the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party. So that's all of the MPs, all councillors and ordinary members. That's obviously a big undertaking, and it's something that we are at the moment working on. We also are working on the publication of an Islamophobia handbook, including a list of commonly used tropes. In conversations with different staff members and the leadership, we realised that there isn't a huge amount of understanding on how Islamophobia works, how it permeates through society, and how people may consciously or unconsciously be partaking in it. So that handbook will be really, really important and useful, both for Muslims and people who aren't Muslims, to be able to put a name to and also agree on the common tropes that are associated with Islamophobia. Following that, we're also promoting the creation
My apologies, you seem to have lost Sumaya there for a moment. So while we check the sound at her end, without inconveniencing anyone, because we do need to come back to Sumaya, because she did really give a very useful insight to how we're moving forward from the report. I'd like to bring our next speaker. So our next speaker is Miqdad Versi of the Muslim Council of Britain, who has been working very hard highlighting Islamophobia and has been well featured in terms of covering Islamophobia in terms of the media. So without further ado, Miqdad, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you to the Labour Muslim Network for giving this opportunity to speak about this really important issue. Many of us will all be aware of the scale of Islamophobia in society. It's huge. It's something that nobody is doing enough to tackle, and a large amount of work needs to be done to tackle it. But we need to understand the scale of this in society before we then come into the Labour Party. So within society, half of the population believe Islam poses a threat to Western liberal democracy. A third of people believe there are these no-go zones, like believe in conspiracy theories about Muslims, like there are these no-go zones where non-Muslims can't enter. And 20% of the population believe that Muslim immigration to this country is part of a bigger plan to make Muslims a majority in this country, even though we represent about 5% of the total population. Now, given that, and even if you look at young children, a third of young children, just under, in the largest poll done of young children in this in the country, a third of young children think that Muslims are taking over England. Now, if you think about all of these things together, we have to recognize how Islamophobia is really entrenched within elements of our society. But when you look at trying to tackle Islamophobia and how the Labour Party fits into that, we have to also think about what drives Islamophobia more broadly. And there have been a lot of studies which have done this, and they've shown how the way the media reports about Muslims and the way that politicians talk about Muslims create what Cambridge University called an atmosphere of hostility towards Muslims. And that's the reality, that it's often the leadership in the way of our society in terms of the politicians, and it's also the media, which is a way by which many of the issues that happen in society are interpreted and understood, and the narratives created, obviously supported by many of the cultural stereotypes that come about Muslims. But these are the things that drive issues to do with Islamophobia. Now, when it comes to the Labour Party specifically, obviously, when you talk about the media, you can talk about a lot of the right-wing press, in particular, being real vehicles of Islamophobia. And there are lots of examples, and you can look at the work of the Muslim Council of Britain's Centre for Media Monitoring to see how many hundreds of examples we have of this, of the way that Muslims are interpreted when it comes to terrorism, whether it's to do with grooming, on many issues, even not to do with any of these things. Christmas, Easter time, anything that can attack Muslims, and we have media examples, particularly from the right wing, talking about it. But at the same time, it's not just on the right of media, and it's not just on the right within politics. Obviously, many of us are aware of the scale of the Islamophobia and the structural institutional Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, from running Zach Goldsmith's whole campaign in London against Sadiq Khan, which has been widely described as Islamophobic. But it's not just on the right. And many people are starting to understand the scale of the issue and the incremental Islamophobia to the rest of society, which is within the Labour Party itself. Many of the figures that the Labour Muslim Network have identified about the scale and the issues that are being faced when it comes to Islamophobia are worse than the issues that are happening broader in society. So it's not fair to say that this is just the same as what's happening in the rest of society. In addition, it's not fair because the party that Labour is talking about, we as the Muslim Council of Britain are not partisan in this, but Labour calls itself an anti-racist party. And if you want to be an anti-racist party, I'd say there's three key pillars to this. The first is that whenever there's Islamophobia, which is identified from members, from individuals affecting Muslim members and other Muslims within society, within the Labour Party, that has to be tackled well. So there's experiences of Islamophobia within the party. The second thing is to do with making sure that you're not associated with Islamophobia and Islamophobes. And whether that's think tanks which share and propagate anti-Muslim stereotypes again and again and again, whether that's donors who themselves are Islamophobic and have said many Islamophobic things, and yet they are being seen as donors and people who are okay to be associated with the party. But it's not just about the issues to do with experiences of Islamophobia party. It's not just to do with the association with Islamophobes and Islamophobia more generally. It is also to do with the policies that are in place to tackle Islamophobia and how Labour is positioning itself on those issues. Whether it is to do with some of the counter-terrorism policies which have gone far beyond what would be considered to be reasonable to keep ourselves safe, which is something that we're talking about, or whether it's actually to do with bringing in individuals to be to oversee and review policies, like, for example, the independent review of Prevent, which has just happened, and William Shawcross has been identified as an individual who'll be leading that. The Labour Party needs to make a very strong position on some of these issues to demonstrate its view that those who come out and talk about Muslims or Islam in such a negative way as some of these individuals have should not really have a place or be supported in any way whatsoever by the Labour Party. And the key thing here is to try and ensure that if we want Labour or any political party to be seen and to be understood as an anti-racist party, those three things have to be dealt with. Reminder, experiences of Islamophobia, not being linked to Islamophobes in any way, and actually policies to tackle and undermine Islamophobia wherever it takes place. And those policies, whether it's to do with from the Home Office, whether it's to do with actually tackling Islamophobia from an education perspective, or hate crime, or the structures of Islamophobia in politics and the media that need to be tackled, if it's not going to be dealt with by this government, then who is going to take the mantle to tackle Islamophobia wherever it is? And therefore, when you look and you stand back as the Muslim Council of Britain, as the largest umbrella body of Muslim organizations, which is what I'm the head of public affairs at, we look at this situation and you want all political parties to deal with Islamophobia in every single way. And that's what I'd like to end with. Our goal here is for all parties to be anti-racist parties, not just silent on racism, and to tackle Islamophobia and any form of racism wherever they see it.
Thank you so much, Miqdad, for that really insightful contribution. I think it's a real pleasure to have you here because I know you so much on social media and the press fighting the good fight. I do have to apologise for the background noise. Obviously, you can tell I'm at home and it's slightly busy today, heading towards bedtime. So I do apologise about the small people making noise in the background. So we'd like to go back to Sumaya, actually, because I think it's really important that we get to hear a lot more information as to how some of the work that her and the executive are doing in terms of how to move on from the report. So Sumaya, I'm really sorry about the bad internet. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I really hope everyone can hear me and see me at this moment. We are having some trouble with internet. So I was talking through some of the practical parts of the action plan that we've agreed with the leadership of the Labour Party. And I had just spoken about the handbook, which would have a series of tropes that we can share, that people can identify as being the ways in which Islamophobia impacts Muslims and the way that it is weaponized and used. So that handbook will be very, very useful for both for Muslims and people who are not Muslim and organizations alike. And that kind of also then leads into the creation of a code of conduct that can be used across all Labour organisations, so whether that's CLPs, Labour clubs, and other parts of the party within the PLP as well, on Islamophobia. And that's in particular to be used by the governance and legal unit, because one of the complaints that we have long received is the progress of complaints and how they don't get seen to, that they are delayed, and the outcome is often unsatisfactory. So that will be really helpful for them to be able to identify and also then use the measures that they have to deal with Islamophobia within the party. The fifth thing on our action plan is that policies and manifestos that are agreed by the party, that are promoted by the party, brought into being in the parliamentary system, should be equality impact assessed, which is obviously something that happens at the moment with big things like the manifesto. But what we want is when pieces of legislation are either introduced to the House or the Labour as in opposition is responding to bills, that there is an appreciation and an investigation into how these impact Muslim communities across the UK, because we've seen a huge amount of conversation happen around human rights, around counterterrorism legislation, around prevent, and how all of these things are often having either a detrimental or a disadvantageous impact on Muslim communities. The sixth thing that we've been working on is linked to the code of conduct is a new transparent complaints procedure, which will give Muslim members confidence. We know that anecdotally this is one of the biggest failings, and we are hopeful that this new procedure is going to be something that's going to be an extension of what's already happening in the party. And then number 7, we have also been talking about reforming the Labour Party selection process. Now, people within the Labour Muslim Network, but also across lots of different cities and communities have told us that actually the selection process is often incredibly uninviting, is often not something that Muslim members feel like they have the confidence to go through, and are sometimes shut out of as well. So that's something that we've highlighted and are really keen to see action on. So the final thing that we've agreed with the leadership on is that there is a 6-month deadline on seeing serious action on these issues, because this isn't something that's, like we said, it's not something that's new. It's not something that should take a huge amount of time for us to see serious commitment to and change. And if we don't see that at the end of 6 months, then of course, as the Labour Muslim Network, we will be seeking alternative routes to campaign for change on that. I just wanted to end with a couple of points, just to say that we know that members and supporters and people who have voted Labour feel that their vote has been taken for granted. We know that people are skeptical because we share some of those, concerns at the same time. And we have been let down in the past. We've been let down really, really deeply. And this is evidenced by the fact that, many people still believe that the party doesn't take the issue of Islamophobia seriously. So we're aware of the history, we're aware of those concerns. And we are engaging with the leadership, but in good faith. And we will only be doing that for as long as we see real action, real commitment, and real steps going forward from the party leadership. And finally, this is an open process. There are always opportunities for people to get involved, always opportunities for member engagement, to become members, to shape the work that we do. This action plan also isn't a static document. It's not just the things that I've mentioned. It can be much wider than that, and we can add and adjust according to how you feedback to us as well. So please do get in touch at outreach@labourmuslims.org. We'd really, really like to hear from you. We would like to talk about your, Islamophobia in your context, in your local CLPs, in your cities, and how you feel as a Labour Muslim member or supporter. And I'll end it there, just as an overview of what we're doing at the moment. But like I said, you're always welcome to get in touch and shape what we do as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumaya, for that really insightful sort of journey and overlook as to where, from the report heading all the way down to the action plan. I think it's really helpful to have some of the sort of frank, honest conversation as to what our limitations are and where the challenges are. So that's really helpful. And I think you've probably been people have been really keen to listen to you in particular, based on how we can take this forward next. So thank you so much, Sumaya, for bearing with us the technical issues. Now, just before I move on to our next speaker, who is thankfully right next to me, virtually.
And almost literally.
And neighbours as well, I'll come to that. You can obviously use the comment function on Facebook, and for those using the stream feed, and please do send your questions through. We will be taking questions at the end, and all of our panelists will speak to those questions. So do send your questions through. We really appreciate that. And I will also answer some of the more particular questions in regards to Labour Muslim Network, I think, in that Q&A section. So after that, with further ado, I'd like to bring in our last speaker, who is Councillor Adam Jogi, who is actually currently the mayor of the London Borough of Haringey, and is a Labour councillor for Hornsey, and is actually one of the youngest mayors in the country at the moment, and is also my fellow neighbour in terms of CLP perspective. So Adam, great to have you, and take it away.
Thank you, and I hope you can all hear me well. Greetings one and all, and just to say I'm very sorry to hear that Afzal has suffered a bereavement, and I'm sure everyone else will join me in sending our love and support to him and his family. I'm sorry that we can't all be together to discuss this really important issue, and hope that one day soon we will be able to do so. My name's Adam Jogi, and I'm the mayor of Haringey. Indeed, I'm Haringey's first Muslim mayor, although tonight, hence no chain, I'm speaking in my capacity as a member of our party and as a Labour councillor. The fact we are on Zoom speaks to the difficult times we continue to live in. We all know that many of our minority communities have been hit hard by the coronavirus and its devastating impacts. And so to all those who've lost a loved one, I send my prayers and condolences. And can I just say to all those listening and watching, when you get the call for your vaccine, please make sure you take it. It's a real honour for me to join this panel tonight and to speak to you all. And if I may say, Chair, it's a real privilege for me to serve under your skillful chairmanship and to hear your two beautiful little boys in the background. But Ibrahim, you are a real role model. You do us all proud, and a credit to our movement here in Haringey and across the country. And as a senior CLP officer where you live, I believe also the only black man on your CLP executive, I look forward to your re-election in an example of Labour Party members practicing what they preach. Now, tonight I've secured the graveyard slot, and so won't repeat the points that many of my colleagues on the panel have already raised. But I do want to reflect on the fact that there are trends, similarities, and common experiences from all of us speaking this evening. And that tells us all that we need to know. Thank you to the Labour Muslim Network and to all those members who genuinely care about tackling these really important issues. Ibrahim, a phobia is, according to the Oxford Dictionary that I looked at a minute ago, that my late granny gave to me when I was younger, is an extreme or irrational fear of or aversion to something. Tonight we're here to reaffirm anew our commitment to challenging and fighting the extreme and irrational aversion to Islam and its followers in our party and across the Labour movement. Those followers are the very people who may be your dentist, your co-worker, your banker, your teacher, or other important roles that makes your life tick day in and day out. And in recent months, they are the same people who are giving you and your family the vaccine as we look to work our way through this crisis. And in a party context, they're your ally, your colleague, and are meant to be your fellow traveller too. I'm very blessed. I come from a mixed background. Of my 4 grandparents, my fathers, and I believe he and some of my Jogi family are watching this meeting, were very, very proud Muslims and went on Hajj more than once. And my 2 maternal grandparents, who I was equally close to, were of a different but equally devout and proud faith too. Our Islam comes from my 2 South Asian great-grandfathers. My granny's father, a guy called Habib Khan, who was a trader from the then Afghan-Indian border, and my grandfather's father, Muhammad Jogi, a trader from Surat in Gujarat. Both men traveled to Zimbabwe, or southern Rhodesia as it was then, and had families with my black Shona great-grandmothers. It shouldn't need to be said, but not all Muslims look the same. And in many ways, we are one of the most diverse faiths across the planet. I love that diversity, and I see it at Juma Whiteman Road Mosque, and I see it in the thriving communities that I represent here in North London, in our part of North London. I know many Muslim members feel that they don't fit the stereotype other members have of what a Muslim member of the Labour Party should be, what we should speak like, how we should dress, how ambitious we should be, or heck, how we choose to live our lives. It's the subtle racism that sadly is all too frequent a feature of parts of our society, but it can have no place in our party. And it's exemplified by the sort of member who describes themselves as a committed anti-racist and then goes on to treat us like we're thick, like we have no place here unless they approve it, and like we need them and them only to succeed. You all don't need me to tell you, but I will anyway, that the party's Muslim members and the Muslim community across the UK, in all parties and none, make a valued and powerful contribution to every part of national life, and to each of them I say thank you. It's so vital that we challenge that racism and bigotry every single day. Labour must once again become a party that will fight any form of racism, any hating of the other, and any attempt to sow discord and disunity. And we must do this because it's the right and the just thing to do. Truth be told, being a member of the Labour Party in the last period of time has made me more conscious of my skin and my faith than I can think of. Not at uni, not at high school, and not in other parts of my life either. And that's a matter of deep, deep regret. I have had so many examples of some of the most outrageous abuse that I've had thrown my way in the 6.5 years I've represented the community I've lived in my whole life as a councillor. And I suspect my experiences have been confounded by the fact that I'm a black man too. One council colleague called me Jihadi Jogi. Impressive alliteration, but deeply offensive. Another called me a monkey and tried to say it was rhyme and slang. Another, who professes to be one of those committed anti-racists, described me to another councillor as that boy. If I broke the law tomorrow, I wouldn't be treated as a boy, I would be treated as a grown man, and I have to say I don't recall other younger men who aren't black, who aren't Muslim, described as that boy by the said colleague. I also had to sit next to another who called me self-righteous when I raised my concerns and admittedly got very angry at watching an elected councillor walk out of the chamber to cowardly avoid voting to support the APPG definition of Islamophobia. We heard it from Samaya earlier on. He had intellectual concerns. Intellectual concerns. Where do you even start with that? And last year, I had one middle-aged, white, male, and quite new party member ask me in a Labour Party meeting, firstly, if I was Islamophobic, and then at the next meeting, if I condemned racism against black people. As if I was invisible, as if me, a black Muslim, for goodness sake, would somehow endorse or sanction behavior of that nature. What the hell was I going to answer to those two questions? And the most outrageous comment I've had in recent months was being told that I am not as much of a Muslim as another councillor, and so therefore had no right to be heard in a discussion on the holy month of Ramadan. If that isn't Islamophobia, I don't know what is. And the sad thing is so many members, councillors and others sit silently. They refuse to engage because I'm not in their faction or they aren't in mine. And in their silence, they sit blissfully unaware of how being on the receiving end of that behaviour leaves someone feeling. For us to make this party a safe space for all Muslim members, irrespective of the strength or otherwise of their personal, and I highlight personal faith, then we need to notice them. We need to respect them and we need to support them. That's why this meeting and all the work that the Labour Muslim Network does to support Muslim party members is so vital. And as well as solidarity, we need the truth. We need the truth. I made a vow to myself to call out the rubbish and the nonsense and the bigotry, and I'm going to continue doing so. And I urge all of you listening, Muslim or not, to do the same too. It doesn't matter if you feel you're going against your friends or what you think the slate would expect you to do. Call out racism wherever you find it. The concept of community doesn't just refer to a set of people, though. It refers to a vision and a commitment to one and all. I know from my local mosque at Whiteman Road, under the leadership of the inspirational and indefatigable President Bibi Khan, just what a support the Muslim community has been to all people of all faiths in recent tough times. From sorting halal food for the food banks to visiting and supporting those on their own. The Muslim community is a vibrant part of our country and must be an integral part of our party. My late grandfather, Haji Adam Jogi, was a man deeply proud of and connected to his Islamic faith. His life experience growing up and living in segregated southern Rhodesia as it was then, and his belief in and practice of the peaceful values of Islam guide me and my family every day, and we all, literally and figuratively, wouldn't be here without him. And they are Labour values too. There is no reason for our party not to be a safe space for Muslim members to succeed and thrive, but we must make that happen. And that's why the party must implement the Labour Muslim Network recommendations with speed and urgency. It's an important report. I have it here, and tonight was not the first time I read it. And I would encourage all colleagues to read and to read it soon. This problem isn't new. It hasn't suddenly arrived. Muslim party members have been experiencing hateful and nasty behaviour for years. And anyone who has served at the highest levels of our party needs to reflect, needs to listen, and needs to learn. Together, we must all look to ensure that Muslim members reach the highest levels of our party. Why are there no Muslims shadowing a government department in the shadow cabinet? How many Muslim council leaders are there? This is something we can all influence, but it's something that Keir Starmer and his team must influence. And I urge them to get their fingers out. They need to remember that representation matters. And we all must remember there are many seats in South and West Yorkshire, in London, in the West Midlands, and in places like South Wales, where Labour only held seats in the 2019 disaster with the Muslim vote. So we all have a job of work to do, all of us together, and I pledge to do my bit to rid our party of bigotry and racism and the hateful scourge of Islamophobia, whether it be conscious or unconscious. So thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And together, let's do the right thing by our Muslim party members, and let's do it once and for all.
Thank you so much, Councillor Jogi. That's really, really a powerful, personal, deeply moving contribution, and that's a fantastic end to our list of, really good speakers and panelists. And I'm really glad you can join us as well. So thank you so much again for your time, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Very deeply moving. And it's also, just before I bring in I think Adam's already doing that, bringing in all of our speakers who are with us till the end, I acknowledge that we have a very large number of people watching tonight on multiple platforms, and I just want to sort of name check, not name check, but just to acknowledge we have several councillors, a few members of the NEC, and a few well-known activists across the country, people from the Northwest, people from West Yorkshire, from South Yorkshire, people from the South East, people from the Midlands, East Midlands, West Midlands, from London, and far beyond, of course. So a real great diversity of attendees and speakers, and such a really great thing to see. So thank you so much, everyone. There's a lot of good friends as well. So really hello to everyone as well. Well, I said hello earlier. Right. So I've been supplied some questions from, oh, of course, don't forget East Anglia. I love Suffolk. Right. We have been supplied some questions from the executive who've been monitoring the questions in the chat. So please do keep typing any questions you have in the comments bar. And I'll take the first 3 that they've picked out for me. And I'll put these to all the panelists, and please feel free to take them in turn. If you'd like to answer them, that's great. If you don't want to, that's fine. And I'll start with the first question. So the first question to all the panelists is, what should we be demanding of the leadership of the Labour Party in response to the recent Labour Muslim Network report into Islamophobia? I'll start with Sumaya.
Thanks, Ibrahim. So I think the first thing that would be really useful is for us to support the LMN recommendations publicly. So if you're part of a CLP, emailing, your relevant contacts in the region and also nationally to ask what they are doing to progress the recommendations in the report. So obviously this isn't something that can only happen top down nationally, it's also something that can happen at CLP level and local regional level as well. So I would say definitely have a look and see what's already going on and what you can support with. It can be as simple as obviously every CLP should have received a copy of the report, but in case they haven't, just sending that across and asking what's happened, what are we going to do? And in terms of demands as well, I think it's really, really important that we continue to raise the issue of Islamophobia, mainly because it's something that, it's something we experience every day, but it's also something that is getting worse and is being entrenched even more the more we, or should I say, the less we see accountability within our political system. So please do keep pressure by raising the issue, by demanding that the recommendations are met at a local level as well as a regional and national level, and also join LMN when we do use our voice to highlight Islamophobia as well. Anyone else want to come in?
Oh, why not? I mean,
that's my job. Sorry. Brad, over to you.
No. Just to add, I think what Sumaya said is spot on. It's really important that whichever party you're from, whichever wherever you are, we need to tackle Islamophobia in every form. And I think what we have to be conscious of in the political climate we live in is there is a view that in order to win the next election, both parties need to target certain constituencies and certain people within those constituencies. And there are views that are put out there that in order to do that, they need to pander to some sort of anti-immigrant and sometimes related to that anti-Muslim or Islamophobic viewpoint. And being seen to be too pro-Muslim is a problem. All I would do is very strongly caution against such approaches from either party, because what really matters and what was actually understandable when you look at a lot of the polling is that we need to think about the issue of racism as anti-racism as a principle. I know it's very easy to talk about certain parties of either side not caring about Islamophobia. We know that's the case, and that's a real problem, especially within the right of politics. But when it comes to trying to get new voters to vote for you, we cannot make it acceptable that stopping your anti-racism to try and get those votes is an acceptable approach. And I think really that's something that within any party, work needs to be done to pressure the leadership that doesn't happen.
Thank you so much, Miqdad. I'm asleep on the job as always. Adam, over to you.
Oh, well, I'll just be brief. My two colleagues have answered many of the key points. But if you go back to the question, what should we be demanding from the leadership of the Labour Party? We should be demanding action, and we should be demanding action now. And my plea to an urge to everybody, whoever you voted for, yes, I voted for Keir Starmer, but that does not mean I'm not going to hold him to account every step of the way to make sure our party is a safe place for all people. What we need to all be doing loudly and proudly and often is writing to the elected representatives, whether it be council level, whether it be MPs, whether it be AMs, whether it be metro mayors or whatever, highlighting how we will not stop until we have a party that's safe and inclusive and respectful of and for all. So action is the one demand that we should put to them, but also they have to listen and they have to learn and they have to notice us, as I said in my contribution earlier. So there's a lot for us to do, there's a lot for the leadership to do, and I hope that the sooner we all come together and work together, we'll be able to make progress.
Brilliant, that's fantastic and concise. Thanks, Adam. So the next question to all the panelists. If the Labour Party does not respond adequately within 6 months, what happens next? Question mark. The EHRC, which is obviously the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We'll go reverse order. Adam.
Thank you. Well, I think there's a balance to be struck. So without question, we need action, and we need it urgently. I think also arbitrary timelines are unhelpful, because it then allows for example, if we are, I don't know, 6 months down the line, but there's a meeting that would take us into 6.5 months to actually concretely get something done and delivered that will transform the experience of Muslim members, then we should have the space to do that. I would hope both by, I'm not sure how many people are watching us, but I'm sure you've got a way of finding out, Ibrahim, but I hope that the contributions made tonight, but also the evident strength of feeling that people have of this and on this issue would mean that we wouldn't get anywhere near 6 months. But, you know, we have to take as many, what's the word? Proud and coherent steps we can to get the soonest action, or action as soon as possible. And I don't even want to be talking about months. We need to be seeing concrete steps, regular meetings, proper engagement, sooner rather than later. And, you know, it's a journey, because, as I said earlier, this issue has been going on for years. So to expect everything to be dealt with and sorted and addressed in 6 months, I think, is an unhelpful, arbitrary deadline. But we have to continue to make the case to all those who can do something about it that we need action, and we need it now.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thanks so much, Adam. Miqdad.
I think that it's really important that the Labour Party acts soon, and I think what Adam says is exactly right. The threat of the EHRC is one that has gained greater credence given what's happened with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and I understand that, and I think that you know, having a means of appeal if the Labour Party doesn't act is as important to have. But I think that what the most optimal solution that we should all try and aim for within any organization, society, is that there is strong leadership to tackle the issue without having to go externally. And obviously that's the goal for any situation. And it should be the goal, I think, within the Labour Party itself. And I think that when we start seeing meaningful action, wherever that is, within the Labour Party, within the Conservative Party, when they have serious issues with Islamophobia, many Muslim communities will be will take that very positively. And I think that we have to hope and work really constructively to see how we can make an illicit change. But yes, if there is no action that's taken, I think everything has to be potentially on the table. But we'd always hope, everyone will always hope that working within the structures will be able to tackle the issue that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I have to agree. And what I wanted to say was that the 6 month timeline that we put in was for us to show the Labour Party leadership that we are serious about this issue, but also it's an adequate amount of time for the initial recommendations in the report to be considered and things to be put in place, and we, by all indications, it is something that is being taken seriously, and that process and that timeline is being met for now. So obviously we can't predict the outcome, but in terms of the conversations and the meetings and the action plan that we've agreed, this you know, it's not necessarily an arbitrary timeline. It's what we think is sufficient for the party, whilst it's doing lots of ongoing work, you know, within, you know, the structures within the party, for this to be something that is considered throughout all aspects of how the Labour Party is changing over the next year. So the reason for this timeline is kind of to set a line in the ground, and for us to say, this is what we are demanding and what we think is acceptable. And obviously anything beyond that, depending on the nature of the work that's been done in the next couple of months, depending on all of these things, we'll then be able to make that decision. But I don't think the EHRC is on the agenda quite at the moment, notwithstanding obviously we've seen how the EHRC has responded to the Muslim Council of Britain's concerns about Islamophobia in the Conservative Party, for example. That's something that hasn't been accepted. It's not been something that's been worked on by the EHRC. So, like Miqdad said, we are trying to do this as smoothly as possible within. And if we get to a position where we decide that it's not being taken seriously, then of course we will look at other potential avenues.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Samaya. Our next question is from Abdullah Mohammed, who, if I'm not mistaken, is from Sheffield. So good to see you, Abdullah. Your question is, what steps can CLPs or wards take to be more inclusive and challenge the status quo in our meetings and organising? I will start again the reverse way around. So Adam, you're muted, I believe.
I started the last one, but that's cool. No worries. Adam, the first man and all that. So, and I'm the eldest, so I'll take that. Well, I think that the first thing is representation, right? Representation matters. And the Labour Party, not just in words, but in deeds, must give effect to wanting to be an inclusive, respectful place. So at CLP meetings, and I used you, Ibrahim, as an example earlier as a senior CLP officer, we need to see more people like you elected to positions at CLP level, at ward level, at Labour group level as well, demonstrating that we will put our money where our mouth is, we'll practice what we preach, and we will actually facilitate and support and encourage the election of people who look like the communities we seek to serve. It's not difficult, right? I mean, I remember, and you can tell I'm passionate about this subject, right? Because I've had 7 years of being quiet, and tonight's given me the opportunity to both share my experiences, but also I hope some of the solutions. And I remember 3 or 4 years ago, sitting in a branch meeting, and I watched the GC delegates. For those who aren't Labour Party members and who probably have better social lives than us, the GC is the committee which is made up of representatives from each ward and affiliates and such. So I was sitting there watching as the GC delegate names went on the list, and I realised not only was I the only black person who was elected, I was the only person who pointed it out at the end of the vote. And one person turned to me and said, and I'll never forget it, turned to me and said, "What a way to lower the tone," when I said that Hornsey is a diverse community. We have a vibrant non-white, non-Christian community. So by that I mean, everybody, and that was deemed to be an appropriate, inclusive response to me raising concerns that us delegation did not look like the community we were all living in and sitting around. So representation is important in electing people. But I think the other thing we need to do is not just be seen to tokenistically, in some cases, nominate people, but we have to change the culture of how we do things. So we need to make sure that our meetings are at a time when it's appropriate or fair, when you factor in people's other private commitments, whether that be family, religious, and such. We also need to make sure perhaps that we have them in safe and accessible places. So for example, if you are, some practicing Muslims don't feel comfortable going to pubs, others do. So, if you have a meeting in a room on top of a pub, that is excluding people, not consciously, but subconsciously, preventing others from feeling able to come along to have their say and to be part of what the party is trying to do. So there are lots of, a bit like Samaya was saying earlier with some of the recommendations, there's some real tangible, easy stuff that can be done really quickly. And doing the tangible, easy stuff really quickly shows both there's a genuine willingness to engage, but also that people people are willing to meet us as a community halfway. because that's all we're looking for. You know, no one's looking for a get out of jail card or for somehow for everyone to cave in, but basic respect, basic decency, and meeting us halfway. So, you know, there are just two examples. Elect people so you actually ensure that our party looks like the country, but also change the really boring stuff, where we meet, when we meet, what time we meet. And they're just two small suggestions. Hopefully make our meetings at whatever level more inclusive.
Thank you so much. Can I bring in Sumaya actually next?
Of course you can, Ibrahim. I'll just quickly mention two different types of training that I think are really important. The first is that what Adam talked about, the general training, awareness of Islam, awareness of Muslims, how people practice, and you know what a Muslim identity or Muslimness is conceived of, and then following that, training specifically on Islamophobia and the impact and the tropes and the kinds of things that very easily you might, you know, the Islamophobic behaviors that we might fall into, but also structurally how organizations, how organizing politically can exclude Muslims, like I said, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously as well. So those are the two types of training that I would encourage all CLPs to go through. The generic, general, you know, Islam 101 introduction, and then following that an introduction and training on Islamophobia.
Yeah, agree with that.
Thanks so much, Sumaya. Miqdad.
To be honest, there's not that much I'd like to add, really. I think that the big element that Sumaya was mentioning in terms of training, whether it's formal training or informal training, I think really, you know, understanding, you know, what matters to Muslims in your area, really is the most important thing. And I think that's just typical basic decency and basic understanding and compassion, I think is really important. And there will be an element, and maybe this is something that Labour Muslim Network can think of, is in terms of sharing some of the best practice in terms of inclusivity that's being done in terms of, you know, whether it's the items that Adam mentioned at the beginning, or whether it's actual training courses, which I know that Element are working on. But I think, you know, sharing some of that best practices, with how some people have changed the way they have their meetings, what they did in Ramadan this year, how they dealt with the fact that, you know, some people didn't want to be in certain environments, you know, whatever that might be, sharing some of that best practice is great. And I think that obviously now in the COVID environment, with everything being on Zoom, that obviously changes things, and maybe may change things for the future as well.
Ibrahim, can I just come back quickly? Just thinking of, that's a really good point. And listening to Miqdad mention Ramadan just reminded me, so many people are willing to, well, there's an iftar dinner at the local mosque. If I put a notice out, plenty of people will very, very quickly run down to the masjid because they know they're going to get good food, a warm welcome, and we'll probably leave with, if BB Khan at White Wood has anything to do with it, a doggy bag to take home for tomorrow's dinner. So, you know, people are willing to engage when it suits them. So what we need to try and do is change the mindset to get an engagement that suits us. And that is the power balance that needs to be found here. And, you know, just thinking more widely, Haringey is blessed by being a very, very diverse community. I've lived here my whole life, and there's some amazing cross-community work. So, for example, Rabbi David Mason, who I know is watching this meeting, is great friends with BB Khan at Whiteman Road, and the interfaith cross-community stuff, which is vital to making all communities who've been under attack and targets of racism feel welcome. But that can be used as a template. You know, meetings are held at the masjid, or they're held at the synagogue. Meetings are held at different times that allow people to facilitate prayer and other commitments. So I'm looking at the widest sense of inclusion and respect will help the CLP and the party, and actually all political parties, because there's kind of an element of this which transcends just the Labour Party, but actually all political parties in our country can learn some lessons by just showing that basic decency and respect, knocking on the door saying, can I come in and say hello, or how can I help you? You know, get counsellors to have their surgeries at the local mosque or in the community element of the mosque. You know, that kind of soft stuff which allows them to, hopefully through some process of osmosis, absorb some of the values and lessons and teachings that many of us hold dear, but that you know, perhaps they haven't had the opportunity to learn and understand. But you know, if they're willing to do that, we'll make sure that they do.
Thank you so much, Adam, and I completely agree about what you say about Haringey. Now we are running out of time, unfortunately. We can't go on forever, even if we wanted to. But I do have one quick question. So I will ask our panelists to be as brief and concise as possible, and then hopefully we will close.
Noted.
Definitely not a dig at anyone in particular. So the question is, how can we fix the selection process to make sure it's more accessible for Muslims and others? I'm assuming this is to do with selections for local government, so council positions or county councils or parliamentary selections. I will start with Miqdad.
What's really important is that in many of these areas, there's elements of networking, which is so important. And often when you have Muslims not in the positions of authority or in positions of power, it means that the mechanisms by which you can have access to what may ostensibly be seen as an open process actually not be as open as it otherwise would be. I'm not an expert of the details of how Labour parliamentary processes work, but I would say,
based on that, then let me put it to you this way: is there how can you have better representation in general of Muslims across politics? Because I'm not saying you're an expert on Labour Party affairs, but obviously you've done a lot of work in terms of political engagement with all the major parties. So, as a broader question for you, specifically as in your role as MCB, how can we get to that sort of place where we have better representation across the board in mainstream politics?
Obviously, I think when you talk about that, there's two sides, right? On the one side, you want to make sure that there's not perception that politics is Islamophobic generally. Where if you look at it, if you stand back and you say, well, the Conservative Party have an institutional Islamophobia problem. Labour Muslim Network is full of Islamophobia. Not Labour Muslim Network. The Labour Party also has Islamophobia problems. Many people might perceive that to be a serious challenge to why should they get involved in the first place. And so I think that on the one scale, there needs to be a recognition that actually that's not, there is the ability to elicit change and actually make a difference. So firstly, it's about people actually having that understanding that they can make a difference. But on the other hand, it's about making all the processes easier. But when you see real great role models, whether it's on the Conservative side, you have Baroness Warsi was the first woman in cabinet, but you have Naz Shah and Azal Khan and many MPs and councillors. Yasmin Dar was on, I think, was on the NEC talking, responding earlier. Zahra Sultan, obviously, Afsana Begum, who are here. Whoever it is, when you have role models who are making real impact, that really creates that incentive for action to happen, and when more people recognize that being in that position is not going to hold you back, it's not going to lead to a target being put on you, but instead there are a group of people who will come out and support you and take you through that process, that you are supported in these difficult tasks. That's what we want. And unfortunately, we know many people, many Muslims in the public space, when they're out there, Islamophobia is rampant against them. They are targeted because of their Muslimness. The racism is clear and unambiguous. And if more people recognize that the Labour Muslim Network is there to help and support those who want to go through in the Labour Party and the Conservatives, similar things can happen. If there is that support network, then that role model and the ability to elicit change will hopefully make things better for the future for everyone.
Thank you so much. So just a reminder of the question, Sumaya. So how can we fix the selection process to make sure that it is more accessible for Muslims and others?
I'm probably going to let Adam talk about the technical side of that, because that's not something that I've been through myself. It's not it's mentioned obviously in the context of the report and the conversations that we're having at the moment. So it's definitely an ongoing thing, and if anyone else does have answers and suggestions, then you're more than welcome to get in touch, and also share your experiences as well with the selection processes and what you found difficult. But I think for me the question elicits probably another question that's a much wider thing that we need to be thinking about, which is, why is politics so hostile to Muslims? Why is it so difficult for us to get involved? Why do we feel that our voices aren't heard, and when they are heard, that they are deemed not moderate enough or too extreme or beyond the pale, or just not kind of befitting UK politics? So I think there's a lot of questions there that we need to think about before we get to, obviously there's lots to be done in making things technically better for Muslims to be able to go through the selection process, but there's a wider atmosphere of mistrust and suspicion that I think is what fuels these problems that we see in in selection processes, and where Muslims are considered to be candidates, whether they're considered to be, potential threats as well to parties. I know that it can be an indication of what people, how willing parties are to defend Muslims as well. So I think, yeah, there's a much wider question at that, which I probably don't have an answer to in it that I can put into 30 seconds. So I'll pass on to Adam.
So that's really helpful, Sumaya. Adam, since you're the elected official here, tell us, what do we do?
Well, I think there's the benefit that now this is the benefit of having come last, because I've had time to actually think about what to say. So thanks to Mick Dan Sumaya for taking the hit there. There's two things, right? So I think there's the practical stuff when it comes to selections. So it's the cost of standing. It's the support that people will require when it comes to family commitments or religious commitments or work commitments. It's the experience that those in office always make clear other people need before they can stand. Oh, you need to go and do this first, and then they never get around supporting that person they're telling to go get the experience. So it's a very neat way of pushing people off into the background so they don't stand. So there's the tangible stuff, and I think the party does need to very seriously look at how selections, not actually just for the Muslim community, but for all minority communities, how the selection process is structured. It can, if you have money, or if you have an easy name. I mean, I remember in 2014 when I was first running. I was 22. I was in the middle of my finals. It was in many ways the worst thing to have possibly thought of doing. I mean, my mum and dad were brilliant. They've always been very good at supporting us. Never told us not to do things as long as it was safe and whatever. But I think they definitely looked at me from afar, thinking you're mad. But I remember being told when the nominations day came that I shouldn't put my middle name, which is Habib, after my great-grandfather, because Jogi is so far and it may put people off. And I've lived in this community my entire life. I went to school here. We all still live here. And everyone, who I do know knew what my name was. So I'm not sure what the difference would have been when the election came. But there's all that kind of soft stuff, right? So looking at how actually it's not soft at all. By that I mean practical stuff. Because when we look at the support provided, the structure of what standing now means, there's some big issues there. And I think that there's an onus on the NEC down to look at what that means and what it looks like, and actually build on some of the recommendations to facilitate those conversations. The same would go for the Jewish community. If you're an Orthodox Jew and there's a selection on Friday afternoon or the GCs on Friday night, you can't go. Well, that's not remotely inclusive or respectful, and that is the kind of stuff that across the piece we need to be addressing. Then I think there's the more macro stuff, which is representation matters, and we can't give lip service to wanting to be a safe party for all people if we don't put a real focus on and effort behind making sure all elected people, whether it's internal at CLP level, or whether it's in the council, or you're a metro mayor, or whether you're running for parliament, or whether, and this is a really easy one, or whether you're going to be nominated for a peerage by the party leader. I mean, they have real easy options to ensure that representation can be advanced, and they should be taking it. I mean, one Muslim man, I assume he's a Muslim, his surname's Khan, but I think he's a Muslim, Wajid Khan, who was an MEP in the Northwest. So he was given a peerage in December, but no black man was given a peerage. And currently there is one black man in the House of Lords on the Labour benches, but the leader's office could have done something about that. So, you translate that across the various different minority communities, and there are things that those in positions of power now can do to tackle some of the inequalities and injustices and lack of representation that we see. So I think so to kind of bring it together, Ibrahim, there are two things. There's the practical stuff, which does require the party to really take stock of what it means to be a candidate, what efforts required from persons seeking it, from access to the membership list, and how do you contact people, and will you get in trouble if you write the day before you're meant to, and you have to, and all this kind of stuff, which prevents people from fully engaging with the process. And then there's the wider representation point. But then I think the last reflection would be this: the onus is on everybody else too, right? It's not just about one community saying, I need this, so therefore, because I am X, I demand that you do this. It requires allies, it requires support, and it requires understanding. And so the answer to the question of what do we do in the selection process, well, non-Muslim members vote for a Muslim candidate if they're qualified, if they're there, if they've had the support to show what they're capable of and have a plan to make your community better. You know, it's not difficult. Your faith doesn't stop you being a good person, doing a good job, and serving the community to the best of your ability. But all too often, it's the same old crew. You know, I've got my own views on how I'd put that description, but the same old kind of baby boomer crew, went to university in the 60s and 70s, got a nice public sector pension, often live in a nice house. So when you know, I live in the private venture sector, like most people my age, making somebody else rich. But these guys of a certain age and demographic tend to vote for people in their own image. And that should also apply to us as a lesson for what we need to do to make the Labour Party safe, because we will not, as things continue, if we don't start having people at different levels who look like the country, we can't then rely on various minority groups to vote for us when the election comes, because we're not putting people who look like them up for office. And so there's a lot for us to do. But as Samaya was saying earlier with some of the recommendations, it's tangible stuff. It's easy. It can be done quickly, but it's a matter of will and intent. And I was looking at the comments earlier, so I missed your first question, so I had to scribble it down. But my plea to anyone is, if you want to stand or you're interested or you have any questions, never hesitate to email me. I'll always respond. I'm happy to help. I would say I'll come and deliver leaflets, but in the context of being stuck in Hornsey, not at the moment. But seriously, anyone who wants to stand, who has any questions, call me, because I remember being in the position of wanting to contribute, not necessarily knowing how to, not necessarily having people who are willing to help you do so. And if I can help somebody help our party look a bit more like the country we seek serve, then I'll do that. So you can find my email on the council website. I won't reply to you from it because you've got to be careful about resources, but I will make sure I respond to you for my private email if you email me, and I'm happy to help. So that is how we make the Labour Party look like the country we want to serve.
Thank you so much, Adam, and that's a really good place to end. And I want to thank everyone for their time, for their thoughts, their contributions. I really want to say that this has not been for nothing. This is actually heading somewhere. I know the Labour Muslim Network team are actually collating all the comments, all the contributions, and that is actually going to feed back actually how they then pursue, in particular, the work plan with the leadership, with Labour HQ, and actually delivering some tangible outcomes. And I want to again express my thanks to all the speakers, to Zara Sultana, to Afsana Begum MPs, to Samay Afzal, to Miqdad Versi, and to Councillor Adam Jogi. And of course, want to thank all the attendees. You know, we've had a great number of people from around the country, councillors, NEC members, very active members in the party. And just to conclude, to say that it's really never the end of the conversation. We are organising a lot more meetings, believe you and me, and there are plenty of opportunities for members to speak as well as listen. So please do get involved, do join, have a look at our website, follow our social media. And as I said earlier, in the beginning of this event, we've had hundreds engaged in the report. We've had several roundtables at every level of the party, many volunteering opportunities. So please, if you really want to carry on this conversation, do get involved, sign up. The email address is info@labourmuslims.org. Our social media is very accessible and we are very responsive, I have to say. So please do reach out. And with that, I wish you a lovely evening. Assalamu alaikum and take care.